We're back this week to make more tiny little veggie patches for your D&D or Warhammer gaming table. After the last veggie patch video I did got so many comments talking about other ways to approach this build, I decided we need to follow up. So today we're going to be making a whole heap more veggie patches, this time using herbs and spices from your grocery store and a pile of beads and other junk from the dollar store. So you can cheap and easy make these yourself. Now the first thing we need is to make a heap of these little base pieces that our gardens will go onto. You can see how I made these in the last video, but for today I've made a 2x2 and a 2x3 inch piece, and I'm going to be making a mold of these so I can replicate it and have as many of these as I need without having to spend all the time making the individual base pieces. I'll show you that quickly, but if you really want to see how to make molds, I have a video I posted a little while ago. Let's get into it. I'll be using this cheap 2-part silicone rubber that I got off Amazon, mixing it together in equal parts and then stirring that up before adding it over all of our models. I've glued these down to a flat base and built up some walls with some leftover foam board scraps. We then leave this for the night to dry, and once we've peeled everything back and pulled out our master, we're left with a really decent mold. Now I mix up a 2-part epoxy resin. This is a quick dry, so we only have a small amount of time to mix that up, pour it in place, and then leave it to dry. We'll speed this up, but this is completely dry and usable in less than 5 minutes. The best part about these drying so quickly is it means we can make a lot of them in a short amount of time. So these came out looking nice. I'm going to replicate that, make us a ton of them, and paint them up ready to build out our gardens. I'll hit them with a grey primer spray paint and then a brown spray paint. Then I'm using my favourite texture paste over all of the earth areas, but really you could just dry brush on a lighter brown. Now that worked out really nicely, leaving us with a massive collection of base garden beds that we can plant out. But we need some plants, so based on your suggestions, I'm off to the grocery store, to the herbs and spices aisle, and the dollar store to buy a pile of beads and some other bits and pieces. So let's get going and see what we can find. Starting at the dollar store, I grabbed some cheap beads, a couple of different styles of hole punches with a few different patterns in them, some more specifically shaped beads, these will work perfectly for lettuces, and some of this fake grass foliage that you can get at most dollar stores. Then off to the herbs and spices aisle of the local grocery store, where I grabbed the peppercorns, as you guys mentioned in the last comments, as well as a handful of other bits and pieces that I could see potential for. So now we have a good collection of cheap and easily accessible bits and pieces to make some more garden beds out of. As I mentioned, all of these builds are going to be either directly from the comments or inspired by the comments from my last garden video. So if you've got any other cool ideas, let me know below and maybe I'll do a third follow-up. Our first build will be from this comment right here that explained a really cool and simple way to make carrots. These carrots will be made using these cheap beads that I got. Unfortunately, I don't have an orange in here, but red will do since I do have a lot of paints. And then I have a couple of different ideas for how to approach the bushy part on the top of the carrots. One with this green wool string and one using this, what do they call it? Spring grass foliage that I got from the dollar store. So we're going to be taking one of our garden beds, grabbing out our beads. I'm going to be using red since we didn't have an orange, dunking them in a little bit of gel super glue, and then sticking them in place. Very quickly I realized it was easier just to dab lines of the super glue in place and then drop these beads onto each of our little drops of glue. So we make a handful of rows of these, grab out some bright orange paint and give them all a coat. Once again, this would have been easier if I had found orange beads, but hey, we work with what we can find. Now we're going to try and make these stalks at the top of the carrots. This was my first attempt, taking some green woolen string and unwinding it, cutting them into small pieces and then gluing them to the top of each of our carrots. It wasn't bad, but it was just sort of hard work and I didn't love the end result. So I decided to try a little bit of clump foliage. This was a much nicer result, so I chopped all that string away and hit all of the tops of our carrots with some Mod Podge and went around gluing down tiny little offcuts of our clump foliage to give all of our carrots a nice bushy head. Is it perfect? No. Will it do at this scale? Absolutely. So this stuff right here didn't do the trick. You could probably get it to work quite nicely if you had more patience and fine motor skills than me, but yeah, it just wasn't quite right. Whereas I actually forgot to try this stuff out and use plain clump foliage and tore it into tiny little bits. But honestly, looking back at this, I think this would have been even easier to use. But I'm pretty happy with the results either way.
So the carrots turned out nice, but we have a bit of space left at the back of that bed. So let's make some cabbages.
Oh, my cabbages!
For our cabbages, a lot of people recommended peppercorns, but I grabbed some coriander seeds and I think I want to try this first. So we'll take our coriander seeds and combine them with another one of the comments, which was recommending to use hole punches, but specifically these ones that are snowflakes. So I got a couple of different sizes and we can start punching holes out of paper to give us some more leaves to wrap around our base pieces to really give them that giant leafy look that cabbages have. I also grabbed a regular hole punch, which is just like a little flower, so we can have a bit more variety as well. And to get the best look for this, we're gonna need to color up some paper.
So a piece of A4 paper and some alcohol markers, and just start going to town on our sheet. I'm going in with a few different greens to give us that nice natural variety, and then flipping it over and doing the same on the other side. But cabbages don't just come in green. So I grabbed out this deep red and violet and made up some more variety so we can have a few different types of cabbages. Now it's time to grab out those hole punches and start cutting out a heap of little snowflakes. Essentially, I'm just going in with a few different sizes so I can test all these out and cutting out as many little snowflakes as I can be bothered. And then cutting out a handful of the little flower shape, as these are a lot more accessible depending on the time of the year. So as I mentioned, my first attempt is going to be with these coriander seeds. I really like the texture that they have, and they could actually be used for a whole heap of different things. So we gather up all of our hole punch bits and pieces, our seeds, and a little bit of glue. Dabbing the glue onto each of our hole punch bits and then dropping our seeds in place. Right here I am playing around with some nail glue as I was recommended it in my previous comments, but honestly I found it just a bit hard to work with. I'm sure it could be great for certain things, but these were so fiddly and it just kept sticking to my fingers. So eventually I went back to the good old gel super glue, dunking our seeds straight in this and then sticking them onto the next piece of paper that we wanted to wrap around them. Once each piece was glued, I just wrapped it up a little bit and bent those leaves into shape, and all of these came out looking amazing. But I realized that I hadn't sealed them up, and being seeds, I don't know how they'll last over the long run. So I grabbed out a cheap watery super glue and gave them all a quick coat so it kind of just sealed everything up. This also helped to harden the paper bases. Once that was dry, I came in with some green speed paint over all of our green cabbages, bringing them into a nice matching colour scheme, and then getting a red and purple ink mix over our red cabbages to bring them up to speed as well. Now it was time to glue everything down on the back of our garden bed. So once again, I tried playing around with that nail glue, worked a little bit better this time, just putting down blotches as I went and dropping our cabbages in place. Giving a nice couple of lines of the green cabbages and then a single row of the red cabbages to put a little bit more colour variation onto this patch.
I love how the coriander seeds have come out. I think this is what I'm going to use when I do this in the future, but since everyone requested in the comments, I'm going to try the peppercorns. They are darker, so they're going to take a bit more painting, but I'm going to follow the exact same process and show you what I end up with. Okay, they look pretty damn good too. I honestly like them both, but I'll let you decide which one you would prefer to use yourself. At least now you get to see them both in advance. And honestly, the peppercorns and the coriander seeds could come in handy for a lot of other builds. But what I'm going to do next is go back to the beads, grabbing out those rose beads and trying to make some lettuce patches. This one is using flower-shaped beads, specifically roses. As was pointed out to me, these are kind of perfect cabbages or lettuce shapes. So we're going to glue a few of these down and paint them up and see how they look.
But first we have to paint them, as most lettuces I've seen aren't gold. So I'm going to grab some stir sticks and a little bit of blue tack and just stick a heap of these down for basically it's a painting handle, so I can spray all these with a grey primer in one go and not make a big mess of things. So I prepared a couple of different rose beads, and while I was here I decided to grab out a few other beads from my bits box that I want to use for some of the other builds and get these all done at once. Now we take them outside, grabbing a grey primer and hitting them all from as many angles as we can, and then leaving that to dry. I forgot to film this bit, but I also covered them all with a Wraithbone White from Citadel, as this takes speed paints a lot easier, and that's what I intend to use for painting these up. You could also just use cheap paints, but I personally love the way that speed paints look. As you can see, they really get down into the crevices, giving you a natural variation across the different highlights and shadows of the build. So we are covering all of our rose beads in a bright green to make some lettuces, and then we have a handful of other bits and pieces here that we can come at. So these smaller flower beads are going to get a different green, giving us the idea of different varieties of lettuces. And while I was here, I painted up these pumpkin and watermelon looking beads because, well, I forgot the order of things. Now it's time to glue a few rows down, just with a couple of dabs of super glue, and then adding them in place. Making a few rows of our bushy lettuces, and then variety is the spice of life, so bringing in some of that other colour.
The lettuces came out beautiful. They are a lot more basic than our other builds so far, but honestly, sometimes that's perfect. All you need is some paint and some flowery beads, and you've got yourself a lettuce patch. Now to try something a little bit more interesting. Since I had all those other beads available, I did paint up a few that were the perfect size to be some, honestly to scale, pretty giant watermelons. So we're going to jump back in now and build out a watermelon vine. I kind of forgot to focus on the painting for the watermelons, but here is a couple of zoom-ins from my old shots to give you an idea of sort of where we started. They were the perfect shape and they stained up nicely to give us this watermelon colour. But first, I want to focus on building out our vines.
We're coming back to that colourful paper we made earlier, and this time hole punching out some leaves. I got these leaf hole punches from a dollar shop nearby, but you can also get some really amazing ones from Green Stuff World. Now for the actual vines, I'm grabbing out some pipe cleaners. You guys have probably seen me use the Encounter Terrain pipe cleaner tree idea in the past. This time we're making some really tiny little ones to work as our watermelon vines. Essentially, you just twist up the pipe cleaners, hit them with a flame to pull all that fuzz back, and it leaves you with a really nice barky texture. Now I'm going to grab out some gel super glue, cover it all up, and start sticking on those tiny little leaves. Obviously, if you can't get the brown pipe cleaners, that's fine. This takes paint really nicely, especially that cheap acrylic stuff you can get from the dollar store. So just use whatever colours you can find, give it a really heavy coat of paint, and then come back to this gluing stage. Once I felt that I had enough leaves on there, I glued this in place on our garden bed, rearranging it a couple of times to make sure I like the fit, and then started applying a little bit more super glue onto all of our leaves. Once again, just like with the cabbages, this kind of just helps make them a little bit more solid, and it's probably going to help this last a lot longer. Now it's time to add in the actual watermelons. So we just use a little bit of glue, sit them in place, and make sure that the head is sitting nicely against one of the vines. These were painted with a grey primer, a green acrylic paint, and then a green speed paint to help fill in those shadows a little bit, and they came out looking great. I'm actually really impressed with how some of these beads just fit the look perfectly for different fruits and vegetables. I then came in with a matte clear coat just to try and hide all of the glossiness left over from the super glue.
You could follow that exact same method to make a pumpkin patch. I had a pumpkin patch in my last video, so I'm not going to focus on that now, but essentially you could do exactly what I just did for the watermelons and add in some little beads painted up like pumpkins. I've got this batch that I've done right here. Don't know exactly what I'm going to do with them, but I've got them for a future build. But for now, I'm going to try something a bit unhinged. I have so many beads and different types of seeds left over that I thought, why not make up some of my own plants? It's a fantasy world after all, so why does everything have to be exactly what we see in our world? So let's kind of just go off the rails and see what we come up with.
So I grabbed a garden bed, a pile of weirdly shaped beads, and just started painting them up different colours. I then squished together some of my leftover cuttings and made some bright red violet leaves poking out the top of them. I didn't love the white base, so we hit them up with a stain and then glued them in place, giving us a brand new fantasy vegetable. Let me know in the comments what you think we should call this new veggie. Our next fantasy vegetable, we're taking some of these cumin seeds. I thought they were a cool shape, so we just stuck down some bits and pieces of flocking and then stuck a few of these sticking out of the top of each one. Finally, I grabbed some larger bits of clump foliage and grabbed some Eye of Newt, otherwise known as mustard seeds. These were the perfect size for some little fruits to be growing on these bushes. So I just stuck a whole heap of them on there, exactly how they come, and they looked great. But I wanted a bit more pop. So I decided to stain a few up. I tried using an ink, didn't love the end results. So I grabbed out some purple speed paint and mixed that in there, and that hit them up really nicely. So once these were dried, I repeated the same process as before, but sticking these colourful ones on there gives us just another variety of fruits. Once again, I have no names for any of these, so in the comments, give me your best fantasy fruit and veggie names. So here we have all of the varieties that we made today, giving us carrots, a couple of different types of cabbages, watermelon, lettuces, and a handful of fantasy veggies. Adding these together with my previous builds, I have a full modular farm with way more different veggie variety patches than I think I will ever need in game. Having the variety is great because depending on the circumstances I want to throw my players in, I can actually have something a little bit more true to the storyline down on the table. Alternatively, you can just lay them all out like this and have a massive variety of different garden patches, giving the table that feeling of variety. I'm loving having a big range, but I especially had a lot of fun just making up my own fantasy veggies and fruits because, like I mentioned, this world is full of magic and all kinds of wild things. Why not have something original in our veggie patches? I just want to do a quick shout out to all the people out there that try my crafts. I always love seeing your own interpretations, and when I see them pop up on different Facebook groups or in any crafting places, it always helps inspire me to keep on going. I also want to send you guys to check out Sahar Crafts. He did his own version of these builds but using clay to make up all of the vegetables, and it's a really good way to come at it if you don't want to be buying all these little bits and pieces. So go check him out, give him some love, and let's get back to the hero shots. These farm videos have been a lot of fun to make. I can't wait to get them out on the table, and I really think they're super handy for pretty much any tabletop game. I think this will probably be the last of the veggie patches videos, but I do still have the fruiting trees coming to add a little bit more edible terrain. Once again, don't actually eat the terrain. It's edible for the minis. I shouldn't have to say that, but I kind of do on the internet. But again, a big thank you to everyone who commented on the last video and gave me all these cool new ideas of different ways to approach it. So now I have more garden and veggie terrain than I will probably ever need, but I love having it. So I hope you guys have found some more inspiration in this one. Let me know again in the comments if you have anything that could inspire me to build something new. And until next time, never stop making stuff.